Hey food buffs! So, to know the full story of how a tire company created the Michelin star, you have to go back to the source, the Michelin guidebooks themselves. This is a replica of the very first Michelin guide ever published over 100 years ago in 1900. This first edition was just a humble little guidebook that was passed out for free to get people to drive more, so their tires would wear out faster so that Michelin could sell more tires. Eventually, they figured out that what really motivates people to drive long distances is telling them that there's something super delicious several kilometers away. This history of the Michelin star being invented by a tire company is why the stars are defined by distances. 1 Michelin star, worth a stop. 2 Michelin stars, worth a detour. 3 Michelin stars, worth a special journey, aka wear your tires out on this one. But, spoiler alert, the first editions did not include the famous Michelin star ratings. In fact, the guides didn't include any Michelin stars until 26 years later in 1926. In other words, the Michelin star wasn't created in a day. It slowly evolved over years because the Michelin brothers who were trying to grow a tire empire weren't setting out to become restaurant tastemakers. So, to give you the most complete history of the Michelin stars, I've painstakingly organized all 117 editions of the guide for you from 1900 to 2025. And I even bought original copies of the old Michelin guides to confirm my research. There's one Michelin guide for almost every year since 1900, with a few notable exceptions. And I'm going to show you the most important Michelin guides throughout history to help you understand how the Michelin star system came to be. This is the incredible true story behind the Michelin stars. We start with the first ever Michelin guide, published in 1900 in France. At this point, the Michelin brothers had just started selling car tires a few years earlier in the mid-1890s. This is what 1890s looked like in Paris, France. Notice how the roads are being used by people walking around and people in horse-drawn carriages. Compare that to the modern day where the roads are dominated by cars. In 1900, when the Michelin Guide was launched, there were less than 3,000 cars on the roads in France, versus hundreds of thousands of horses used for transportation. Think about what that meant for a tire company. Because cars were such a novelty at the time, the Michelin brothers knew that customers needed more guidance to use their cars. Streets back then were set up for horses, and there were no gas stations yet. This is exactly why they created the first Michelin Guide. The original purpose of this guide is clearly stated in the foreword. This work aims to provide all the information that may be useful to a driver traveling in France to supply his automobile. Back then, the guide did not cover the 3 stars. Instead, it covered the 3 R's: refuel, repair, and rest. The only restaurants mentioned in this first guide were ones that happened to be attached to hotels. After the Michelin Guide launched, the tire company continued to grow, and the Michelin Guide grew with it. Pretty soon, it covered not only France, but also other countries in Europe. By the way, notice that the Michelin Man bibendum was a real ladies' man. Unsurprisingly, the guide was targeted at the rich men who were expected to be the ones driving the car, so their mascot was a cigar-smoking womanizer. Very different from the baby-face version that we see today. But production of the Michelin Guides was paused during World War I, during which France was a primary battle zone, suffering years of trench warfare. So between 1915 and 1918, there were no guides published. The next key Michelin Guide was the 1920 edition. This is the first guide they charged money for, and that led to important changes. What you need to know is that charging money meant that they had to prove real value in order to keep their audience. So two important changes were made for this edition. First, they removed advertising to show that they were impartial and their recommendations could not be bought. Second, they began sending out the anonymous inspectors to review restaurants. Both those moves cost them money, but those moves gave the Michelin Guide its trustworthy reputation that has let it become such an important restaurant reviewer. Following that big change in the 1920 edition, Michelin paused for a year to restructure the guide. Then they really started to focus more on restaurants. And then, finally, the next special guide edition is the 1926 edition. In here is the first ever Michelin star rating. This came out after 6 years of secret restaurant reviewers. And yes, you are looking at an original copy. This is barely holding together after 99 years. So let's take a look. There it is. Michelin star history. But notice that there is only one star. The first Michelin star was a one-star system because this is only the beginning for the Michelin star. It's in the 1930s that the Michelin star becomes what it is today. In 1931, we go from a one-star system to a three-star system. And I have the original copy to show you. This one I keep in a bag because it looks a little bit moldy to me, and I find that kind of gross. There it is. You're looking at the first ever publishing of the 3 Michelin stars. But perhaps the most important of all the Michelin guides is this, the 1933 edition. Let me show you why. This is the first time we see the famous definitions of the Michelin 3 stars, where 3 stars is worth a special journey and 2 stars is worth a detour. This is my favorite edition. That is so cool. As an aside, take a look at the size difference between this 1900 edition and this 1933 edition. That's a physical representation of how much the guide grew from its original purpose as a driver's handbook. After decades of evolving Michelin guides, it finally finds its ultimate form in 1936. From 1936 on, you see from the covers that the Michelin Guide has fully established itself as a restaurant-focused guide. But wait, what is this? It would be irresponsible not to talk about this historical Michelin Guide. This is a replica of the Michelin Guide, which was reissued during World War II. You can tell right away that it's special. First of all, it has its yellow cover, unlike the usual red. More importantly, it says on top, for official use only, and it says on the bottom, reproduced by Military Intelligence Division, War Department, Washington, D.C. This edition is sometimes called the American Guide. This is because American soldiers used this as a guide to get around the French coast while they were fighting the Nazis. The Michelin Guide was perfect because it was packed with the most up-to-date and detailed maps available at the time. Notice that this says 1939, but it was actually reissued in 1944 and given to all the commanders involved in the D-Day landings. They reissued this 1939 edition because it was the last one printed since the war started. Alrighties, let's finish this story off with the modern day Michelin editions. In 1997, you get the Bib Gourmand symbol for the first time. This is Michelin's category for good meals at moderate prices. And a little tip for you, it's a great place to look for ideas for birthday dinners or date night ideas. This Bib Gourmand category was first introduced in 1957, but it was just an R rating back then. Next, the 2006 edition was the first US-based edition. It started with New York City and had 4 3-star winners. Technically, they received their stars in 2005, but the publications come out after. Lastly, we have the 2025 edition. 125 years after the first guide, the stated mission of the guide has changed completely. Okay, food buffs, this is a super new channel and I'm gonna need all the help in the world. So please hit the like button to let YouTube know that this is in fact good content, and hit subscribe to see more incredible true stories behind food. See you next time.